The story begins amidst a blood-soaked battlefield. Countless warriors, humans and other races alike, stood united, their collective goal singular and unshaken: to destroy the demon, a man once known as Nox von Rienhaver. Their desperate battle was not merely one of survival, but a last, fevered attempt to restore balance to a world teetering on the brink of ruin. From afar, a massive offensive was launched. The Alliance had assembled an overwhelming force. Men, monsters, even dragons, all converging toward a single swordsman, a white-haired warrior standing amidst the carnage, gripping his black blade. A knight, positioned in the rear, bellowed to his comrades to cut down the monster, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Fueled by raw determination, the warriors roared in unison, charging forward with all their might. And yet, Leon remained eerily composed. His gaze was locked onto Nox von Rienhaver, a flicker of nostalgia surfacing in his cold, calculating eyes. Those very words, once spoken by his closest friend, a comrade who had fought beside him through countless battles, echoed in his mind. Leon could still recall that moment vividly, though he had never fully understood its depth. But one thing was certain. When those words had been spoken, he had seen tears of anguish streaming down the fading eyes of his friend. On that day, the power of Nox von Rienhaver was overwhelming. Even faced with a relentless wave of monsters and warriors, he did not falter. His expression remained unchanged, cold, resolute, and utterly unshaken. Every swing of his blade was a death sentence. A single, swift slash cleaved through dozens of enemies at once. It didn't matter whether they were human or beast. None who dared challenge him survived. He was a calamity incarnate. In mere moments, the battlefield had become a graveyard. Corpses lay scattered across the blood-soaked land, a grim testament to the absolute devastation wrought by the swordsman standing amidst the carnage. Nox tightened his grip on his sword, his movements slow but deliberate, stepping forward with a single destination in mind: Leon von Marba, who stood resolutely at the opposite end of the field. Leon maintained his composure. Finally, he spoke calmly, though his voice carried emotions he struggled to contain. He asked why his friend had turned his back on him. Even as the words left his mouth, Leon himself could not fully comprehend how things had come to this. He wondered what had driven Nox to make a pact with demons, whether he had betrayed them humanity, or if everything they had fought for meant nothing. Nox scoffed. He spoke of Leon's tone, the mannerisms. It all reminded him of someone else, a distant memory, a shadow of the past, but questioned whether it even mattered at this point. The cryptic response only deepened Leon's curiosity. He refused to back down, stating that while it might not mean anything to Nox now, it meant everything to him. He demanded to know why Nox had abandoned them and betrayed everything they had fought for. For the first time, the smirk faded from Nox's lips. His features hardened, and his gaze turned cold as steel. He declared that if Leon truly wanted answers and to end the suffering, he would need to kill him. That, he said, was Leon's only option. The weight of Nox's words pressed down like an executioner's blade, and within Nox's eyes, a killing intent began to rise. Leon inhaled deeply, his expression unreadable, and stated that if this was what Nox wanted, then he would do it. As the final word left his lips, the grimoire in his hands flipped open on its own. An ominous purple aura erupted from his body, spreading outward like a flood, coiling around the fallen knights littering the battlefield. The dead began to rise, their empty, soulless eyes flickering to life with an eerie glow. Their movements were slow at first, then grew unnaturally fluid. And without Leon uttering a command, the undead army surged forward, drawn by the scent of fresh blood lingering on Nox. Mere seconds. That was all it took. Nox's blade flashed before anyone could even register the movement. A storm of slashes carved through the battlefield, the air howling with the shrieking sound of steel. The chilling noise sent a shiver down the spine of anyone who heard it. The bodies of the undead in front of him were covered in countless slashes. However, moments later, the wounds began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Within just 2 seconds, they had completely disappeared, leaving no scars behind. This was because Leon was supplying them with mana from behind. With bodies that were immortal and knew no fear of death, the undead charged forward once more, attacking without hesitation or doubt. The leading undead swung its sword, aiming straight for Nox. A metallic clang echoed through the air. From Nox's perspective, he remained calm, effortlessly parrying each of the attacks from the creatures before him. Then, in a single swift movement, he stepped forward, swung his sword at lightning speed, and instantly cleaved the lead undead in half, severing it so completely that there was no chance of recovery. Before long, under Nox's overwhelming strength, the rest of the monsters met their end. The black sword in his hand became enveloped in a dark purple aura, and his eyes gleamed with excitement as he let out a loud laugh. He noticed Leon had gotten much stronger. With those words, Nox braced himself, pushing off with his legs and lunging forward with incredible speed. Meanwhile, the book in Leon's hand automatically flipped through a few more pages. Whatever spell he had just cast, a massive six-pointed magic circle suddenly appeared behind him. A dark, swirling portal materialized, and from within, two massive crimson hands wielding great swords reached out. Then, a towering undead warrior, clad in heavy armor, emerged from the portal, standing on the opposite side of Nox. Instead of feeling fear, Nox was utterly exhilarated. Behind him, ghostly images of several eerie eyes flickered into existence, radiating a sinister aura that sent chills down anyone's spine. Without exchanging another word, both sides launched straight into battle. A massive explosion erupted upon impact, sending clouds of dust billowing across the battlefield. The sheer force of the clash caused Leon to stumble, momentarily losing his footing. Before he could regain his balance, Nox's figure appeared right in front of him, with a sword charged with mana. Nox swung directly at Leon with a strike so fast that it tore through the air like a razor-sharp gale. However, Leon was no pushover. At that moment, he commanded the massive undead warrior behind him to move, raising its enormous sword to block Nox's incoming strike. For a brief moment, both of them stood in a temporary standstill. Leon stared directly into Nox's eyes. His voice was cold and unwavering as he spoke. He would kill Nox if necessary to get an explanation from a revived corpse. The answer about why Nox had turned his back on them. These wounds Nox had left behind would never fade from his memory. Leon questioned why. Nox, he once knew so well, had chosen to disappear from this world and embrace solitude instead. The battle was nearing its end. As Nox himself had said, nothing would be resolved until one of them fell on this battlefield. Leon silently acknowledged this in his heart, accepting the inevitability of it. Everything began with a scene where a razor-sharp guillotine, still tainted with fresh blood, stood ready for its next execution. Beneath the looming blade, a man awaited his punishment. Just 10 feet away, the cold, menacing steel hung overhead, casting a dark shadow over the man's jet-black hair. The deepest fear imaginable weighed heavily on his soul, like a terrifying nightmare brought to life. Leon stood there, his gaze fixed on the man, his eyes lifeless and devoid of emotion. In his hand, he still gripped a short sword, the weight of the situation pressing on him. Meanwhile, the man beneath the guillotine bore the same hollow gaze, his face eerily resembling Leon's. A woman spoke, her face contorted with grief. She questioned how things had come to this, wondering what their lord had done to deserve such humiliation. Beside her, a man immediately reached out, motioning for her to keep quiet. He warned her to watch her words, for if she didn't, she would be the next one to meet the guillotine. His gaze then shifted toward the platform where a nobleman, dressed in fine garments, observed the scene with twisted delight. As the man continued, reminding her of the harsh reality, they had seen enough to understand the merciless nature of those rulers. The woman hesitated before responding, struggling to find the right words. But the man shook his head, his tone resigned. The only thing they could do was stay silent and far away from those in power. In this era of war, silence was the only way to survive. The flames of death continued to rage across the continent, leaving only destruction in their wake. As the ashes of slaughter engulfed the eastern lands, the noble house of Marba had become another victim of this hellish conflict. In the wake of war, The strong did as they pleased while the weak were left with nothing but theft and desperation. The weak had no choice but to gamble with their lives daily, constantly dancing with death, unable to escape the gates of hell. Overseeing this, the head of the rival Sylvester family, Count Alan de Sylvester, stood watching the man bound beneath the guillotine. A smirk played on his lips as he spoke with amusement, eager for the event to begin. Around him, the crowd murmured louder, but amidst the noise, Leon remained completely still, like a statue. Seeing this, Alan frowned slightly, reminding him that he had given an order. Hearing those words, Leon finally moved. He extended his hands, gripping the hilt of his sword tightly, and stepped toward the rope holding the execution blade in place. However, for a moment, he hesitated, his body frozen, unable to act. Above, Alan, overwhelmed with anticipation, could no longer contain himself. His voice sharp and impatient, he urged Leon to cut the rope. Leon's body moved like a lifeless puppet, devoid of will. His arms slowly lifted, and with the crowd watching in stunned silence, the sword in his hands came down, slicing through the rope. The guillotine was released, its blade descending swiftly and executing the unknown man in an instant. The sound of death was as sickening as a cleaver striking meat. Crimson droplets painted a gruesome portrait across the pale face of the young boy, filling the air with the metallic scent of blood and iron. No one could escape the brutal reality before them. It was as if fate had orchestrated the cruelest of ironies. This was the unbearable burden the boy was forced to carry, to sever all ties between his father and the mortal realm. Leon von Marbach, son of Rune von Marbach, stood as the executioner of royal blood, the one who had executed his own father. The head of a noble house was not just a member of the aristocracy, but the very pillar upon which the kingdom rested. Yet, as a playwright once wrote, great power came with great responsibility, a burden only those capable of bearing it could endure. With Rune's death, Leon rose as the new head of House Marbach. Later, in House Marbach's council chamber, Leon sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he silently observed the heated arguments unfolding before him. A man with slicked-back brown hair slammed his fist onto the table, his voice echoing through the chamber. He expressed concern that House Sylvester was expanding its influence at an alarming rate, warning that they might soon invade Marbach territory outright. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room as one by one the council members turned to Leon, their voices thick with urgency. They implored him to fortify the defenses immediately, begging for a decision. Sat at one of the seats, an older man with a thick beard nodded solemnly, acknowledging the moment. The time had come, he said, for Leon to bestow his wise judgment upon them. Faced with mounting pressure, Leon responded in a calm, detached tone, urging patience. He needed more time to contemplate. Rising from his seat, he signaled his intent to leave the council chamber. His abrupt movement left the room in stunned silence, but protests soon erupted. They could not understand his hesitation, the urgency of the matter, and the potential disaster looming over House Marbach. Ignoring the protests, Leon exited swiftly, his mind focused elsewhere. As he walked down the silent corridor, deep in thought, he reflected on his position. With the passing of his father, Rune von Marbach, the head of House Marbach, Leon had been forced to take his place at the young age of 14. The Marbach family had once been a formidable lineage of necromancers, wielding a power that struck fear into all who knew their name. However, that legacy had long since faded, lost to the relentless tide of history. Leon cast his gaze toward two portraits hanging in the hallway. One depicted a man, the other a woman. He halted, slowly approaching the portraits and studying them in silence. In a quiet moment, he asked what they would wish for him to do in their stead. He knew the question would go unanswered. His parents were gone, and the dead could not speak. Still, he longed for guidance on how to restore the family's lost glory. Lost in thought, Leon soon found himself standing before a grand door. Above it hung yet another portrait, this one of Wellen von Marbach, the progenitor of his bloodline. A sliver of light obscured the features of the painting, adding an air of mystery. Wellen von Marbach had been a legend in his time, the only true necromancer of the age. Legends told of how he first rose to power on the battlefield, carving his name into the annals of history. Yet, since the golden era of their founder, House Marba had struggled to produce another true necromancer. Over time, the family had steadily declined, and in the end, Leon had been forced to take his father's life with his own hands. The weight of that realization settled heavily over him. He exhaled deeply, then reached for the door handle, pushing it open. Inside his father's study, 2 books lay on the desk, one of which stood out, its cover pitch black, emblazoned with the symbol of an eye. Leon's gaze lingered on it, his mind drifting to thoughts of his family's history. Welland von Marba had been a near-mythical figure, capable of decimating enemies with a mere wave of his hand, summoning endless legions of the undead in an unceasing tide of destruction. It was said that he forged a pact with the demon King Marba to unlock one of the continent's greatest mysteries, the forbidden tome that granted him the power to rule as an emperor of the dead. This, Leon realized, was the Necromancer Codex, a priceless relic passed down from their founder, the very artifact that had once elevated House Marba to its peak. With that in mind, Leon carefully flipped through the pages, scanning them intently. Then, suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind. The unexpected presence startled him. His body stiffened, and his gaze darted around the room. Who had spoken? He muttered under his breath, wondering how a voice had entered his mind, especially in a chamber shielded against magic. After a brief pause, Leon regained his composure, speaking aloud, his voice calm and measured. He asked the identity of the one addressing him. The voice responded, reassuring him that it posed no threat. It spoke of fear not, though Leon felt uneasy. Sweat beaded on his face as he asked why he should believe it. In response, an intricate magic circle appeared behind him, pulsing with ancient power. Then, in the blink of an eye, Leon found himself face to face with a colossal lion. The lion, towering and majestic, had curved goat-like horns upon its head, and its rich auburn mane flowed like fire. For any ordinary person, such a sight would be terrifying enough to make them tremble in fear. But Leon's expression remained completely impassive, showing no trace of fear. He simply asked where he was. The massive lion appeared somewhat surprised, lifting one of its enormous paws and pointing at itself in confusion before speaking again. It wondered aloud if Leon's predecessor had never mentioned its existence. Leon's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone growing colder as he asked if the lion was referring to his father, Rune von Marba. The lion gave a slight nod in response, confirming the connection. It spoke with a mix of disdain and regret, explaining that it had sensed the magical bond between it and Leon's father had been severed. A flicker of rage crossed the lion's face, its powerful jaws clenching with an audible creak. It spoke of how it had feared Rune's merciful nature, which had made him unfit to lead a dark family. The lion admitted it should have foreseen the tragic end Rune would meet, but it demanded to know who struck the final blow. Leon, making no attempt to hide the truth, answered with indifference. He calmly declared that it was he, Leon von Marba, his own son, who had killed his father. The lion froze, stunned by the admission. An overwhelming surge of energy erupted from its massive form, shaking the air as its voice thundered with fury. It demanded confirmation once more, roaring in rage, its jaws opening wide as if ready to devour Leon. Yet, despite this terrifying display, Leon remained utterly unfazed. His cold, unwavering gaze met the lion's burning eyes, and he firmly repeated his statement. It was he who killed his own father. The lion's fury intensified, and its body erupted with a monstrous, killing intent directed straight at Leon. In that moment, memories of Rune's death flooded Leon's mind. His father's final moments, the sensation of warm blood splattering onto his skin. That feeling had never left him. But it wasn't just Leon who relived these memories. The enormous lion saw them as well. As it absorbed the emotions Leon had felt during the act, the violent rage that had surged through its being began to fade. The lion fixed its gaze upon Leon. It spoke, its tone heavy with disappointment, observing that although Leon had carried out the act, he was not truly the one who had killed his father. Leon slightly lowered his head, his voice steady as he replied that this was not true and that the lion knew it. The lion's expression shifted slightly, intrigued by Leon's response. It let out a small sigh before lying down on the ground, its piercing eyes never leaving Leon as it observed him closely. Setting aside its disappointment, the lion expressed its interest in the abyssal aura it sensed within Leon. Beneath the emotionless facade, the lion could feel the immense reservoir of magic the boy carried. It was perplexed by how such a young child could contain so much power. As it pondered, its perception revealed something even more unsettling. Beneath Leon's feet, countless corpses were piled high like a mountain, a chilling aura spreading through the space. The sight sent a shiver down the lion's spine, its eyes flickering with astonishment. It muttered in disbelief, realizing that Leon had surpassed even his ancestors in potential. Lost in thought, the lion seemed to come to a realization. It adjusted its stance, bringing a claw to its mouth as if clearing its throat before speaking again. The lion introduced itself as Marba, one of the 72 demons of hell, who had chosen to turn his back on his demon kin and walk alongside humanity. Marba revealed that he had been a longtime companion of Wellen von Marba, the original source of necromancy, the power that had become the unique legacy of the Marba bloodline. Leon listened without surprise as the lion introduced itself, as if he had long anticipated the revelation. He calmly responded, stating that he knew of Marba from the family's mythology. It was Marba who had taught his ancestor the forbidden arts of necromancy. The lion confirmed the truth of this, admitting that it had once been a terrifying demon before being bound to the Tome of the Dead. Leon's gaze grew colder as he stared directly at Marba. His voice carried a sharp edge as he asked why the lion had abandoned the family in their final moment of need. His eyes glowed slightly, and even his usually emotionless face betrayed a flicker of anger as he spoke. But Marba, upon hearing this, nearly shrugged and let out a chuckle of amusement. He questioned Leon's claim of abandonment, asking what proof there was to support such an accusation. Leon's expression darkened slightly as memory surfaced. Slowly, he recounted that since the time of their ancestor, Wellen von Marba, the family had been unable to produce a necromancer of his caliber. This, Leon argued, was proof that Marba had turned his back on them. Marba listened intently, giving no response. Without hesitation, he declared that the reason Leon's family had been unable to produce a true necromancer was because they were too weak to be worthy vessels. That weakness, he explained, was why none of them had been able to inherit even a fraction of Wellen von Marba's power, a clear sign of the decline of their bloodline. Leon absorbed these words, his mind processing the implications. After a moment, he realized Marba had no reason to lie. Accepting the truth, he nodded and said he would believe what was being said. Marba raised an eyebrow in amusement. He commented that Leon seemed quick to accept reality. Leon responded indifferently, stating that in war, the weak must always suffer defeat. It was an undeniable law of the universe. Marba studied him for a moment before asking if that was the reason Leon had accepted his father's death so easily. Leon remained expressionless, his voice devoid of emotion as he replied coldly, stating that his father's death had been nothing special, except for one thing. The moment he completely turned his back on their family. Leon paused for a brief moment, locking eyes with Marba. He then made a proposal. He had a request to ask of the demon. Marba's expression shifted slightly, and his voice carried a mocking tone as he responded. He questioned Leon's idea of a request, pointing out that a request implied goodwill, and in such an arrangement, the one making the request was always at a disadvantage. In dealings with a demon, Marba explained, it was more akin to a contract, a transaction. Without hesitation, Leon responded decisively. He asked if Marba could grant him the power of necromancy in exchange for a contract. Marba turned his head slightly, his expression radiating arrogance. He scoffed, questioning what right a brat like Leon had to ask such a thing. He then asked if Leon truly believed his abilities were worthy of such power. Leon answered without missing a beat, his conviction unwavering. He stated that if he were incompetent, he wouldn't even be capable of standing before Marba and having this conversation in the first place. Legends, he pointed out, claimed that speaking to a demon would drain the life from an ordinary person, subject them to hallucinations, and leave them to perish in agony. Considering he was still standing there, Leon reasoned, it meant he must have at least some potential. As Leon spoke, he carefully observed Marbaz's expression, analyzing every reaction. Before long, even Marba himself was forced to acknowledge the boy's potential. The demon began to recognize the considerable power Leon harbored. After a moment of thought, Marba spoke again, reminding Leon that every request made to a demon came at a price. However, before Marba could finish his sentence, Leon cut him off without hesitation. He already understood that everything was a contract, and he wasn't foolish enough to think he couldn't repay Marba more than what he asked for. As he spoke, Leon pointed to himself with unwavering confidence. His sheer self-assurance caught Marba off guard, causing the demon to freeze for a moment. Then, suddenly, Marba burst into laughter, a booming, thunderous laugh that echoed across the space. He declared that, in that case, they would form a contract. Leon, however, was not so naive as to enter into a contract without understanding the terms. He asked directly what Marba wanted in exchange. Marbaz's face twisted, contorting into the true visage of a demon. With a voice dripping with hunger and desire, he declared his price. He wanted everything, every single aspect of Leon's existence. In response, Leon's lips curled into a devilish grin that matched the demon's own. He expressed relief at hearing Marbaz's price, stating that he would gladly sacrifice every part of his insignificant existence.